What if the most terrifying conspiracy wasn't hidden in the stars but buried beneath our feet? What if the government wasn't covering up visitors from another world, but something we created ourselves? Something that refused to stay dead? Before we dive into tonight's story, I want to give a thank you to Marker 9410, Jackman and Tyler Bailey, and so many others who suggested this topic. Your ideas keep this channel going, so please keep leaving your suggestions in the comments below. Tonight we're heading to northern New Mexico, to a place where the desert keeps secrets, and where one man's curiosity may have cost him everything. This is the story of the Archuleta Protocol. Part 1. The Forgotten Files. Daniel Reeves had spent 46 years trying to forget Dulce, New Mexico. He'd been largely successful until the morning of March 12, 2025, when the past arrived in his email inbox disguised as a PDF. At 67, Daniel lived alone in a modest ranch house outside Alamogordo, where the desert stretched endlessly, and neighbours were measured in miles rather than feet. Retirement suited him. He'd spent his career as a geotechnical engineer, drilling holes into the earth for the Department of Energy, Los Alamos National Laboratory, and various contractors whose names changed more often than their security clearances. He'd mapped fault lines, assessed geological stability, and kept his mouth shut about things that didn't concern him. The email came from the Veterans History Archive Initiative, a grant program encouraging former military contractors to digitize their old project records for historical preservation. Daniel had applied 6 months earlier, mostly out of boredom. They'd sent him a scanner and simple instructions: catalogue everything, upload what wasn't classified, flag anything that might be. He'd been working through boxes of yellowed documents for weeks: soil composition reports, hand-drawn survey maps, photographs of drilling equipment caked in red desert clay. Most of it was mind-numbingly dull, the kind of technical minutiae that only another engineer could appreciate. But that morning, scanning a stack of Department of Energy environmental cleanup files from a 2025 public records release, his hands stopped moving. The coordinates were unmistakable: 36.9428 degrees north, 106.9931 degrees west. Archuleta Mesa, Dulce, New Mexico. The report was dated February 2025, stamped with multiple agency seals: DOE, Department of Homeland Security, EPA. The language was bureaucratic and vague, designed to bore anyone who bothered reading it. Ground instability due to deep-bore tunneling activities and implementation of biological containment protocols following undisclosed 1979 incident requiring remediation. Daniel read it 3 times, his coffee growing cold in his hand. Biological containment. Archuleta Mesa. He'd been there. He'd been part of whatever this was. Daniel pushed away from his desk and walked to the window. Outside, the morning sun painted the Sacramento mountains in shades of amber and rust. His reflection stared back at him. A lean man with silver hair and sun-weathered skin, eyes still sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like someone who'd earned a quiet retirement. He looked like someone who'd successfully buried the past. But memory is a stubborn thing. He returned to his filing cabinets, pulling open drawers he hadn't touched in years. His fingers walked through labelled folders until he found it. A thin accordion file marked LANL. MISC Projects 1978 to 1980. Inside were pay stubs, travel vouchers, equipment requisition forms. But the daily logs from August 1979, the detailed survey notes, the incident reports, the photographs, were gone. He remembered keeping them. He remembered filing them carefully, the way he filed everything. But at some point in some year he couldn't quite recall they'd vanished, or been taken. Daniel sat back down at his computer and opened his blank document. From memory he began typing: Project Gaslight, August 1979, Archuleta Mesa, Dulce, New Mexico. Team lead, Daniel Reeves. Assignment: Geothermal survey and structural assessment of subsurface cavern system. That was the official story anyway. Part 2. The 1979 operation. The past came back in fragments, sharp and bright against the dark backdrop of forgotten years. Summer 1979. Daniel had been 31 years old, newly married, working contract jobs for Los Alamos National Laboratory. The pay was excellent, the work was interesting, and he had learned not to ask too many questions. When you worked for LANL during the Cold War, you understood that curiosity was a luxury you couldn't afford. The call came in late July. A supervisor Daniel had worked with before, a man named Gordon Voss, asked if he was available for a 6-week project in northern New Mexico. Geothermal assessment, Gordon said. Straightforward drilling and core sampling. The location was remote, the pay was double his usual rate, and secrecy protocols would apply. Daniel said yes, without hesitation. He arrived in Dulce on August 5th, driving a rental truck loaded with seismic equipment and diamond-tipped drill bits. The town was small, quiet, nestled in high desert country, where the Jicarilla Apache Reservation sprawled across mesas and canyons. Archuleta Mesa rose to the north, a massive table of rock and sparse vegetation that looked like a sleeping giant. The project site wasn't in the town proper. Daniel followed dirt roads for another 40 minutes, past cattle gates and washouts, until he reached a temporary encampment. 3 aluminum trailers, 2 industrial generators, and a drilling rig positioned near the base of the mesa. A chain-link fence had been erected around the perimeter, topped with warning signs about blasting zones and geological testing. Gordon Voss was waiting for him, clipboard in hand, looking exactly as Daniel remembered. Stocky, balding, with the permanent squint of someone who'd spent too many years reading technical specifications in bad light. "Right on time," Gordon said, shaking Daniel's hand. "Let me show you what we're working with." Inside the main trailer, geological surveys covered every wall. The maps showed an extensive cave system beneath Archuleta Mesa, tunnels that supposedly connected to an abandoned 1950s nuclear shelter built during the height of Cold War paranoia. The official story was that they were assessing the stability of these tunnels for possible geothermal energy extraction. Daniel nodded along, examining the depth readings and soil composition reports. Everything looked standard, professional, boring. "Any problems?" Daniel asked. Gordon hesitated just for a second. "We've had some unusual readings. Temperature fluctuations, minor seismic activity that doesn't match known fault patterns. Probably nothing, but we need someone with your experience to make sense of it." They started drilling on August 8th. The first week was routine. They expanded an existing shaft, pulling up core samples of sandstone, limestone and volcanic rock. Daniel supervised the drilling crews, adjusted their angle and depth, monitored seismic sensors placed throughout the cave system. Everything proceeded according to plan. The second week things changed. On August 23rd at approximately 2:47 p.m, the temperature sensors spiked. Daniel was in the trailer reviewing data when the alarm went off, a shrill electronic beep that made everyone jump. He rushed outside to the drill site. The rig had stopped. The crew stood back, staring at the shaft opening. One of them, a kid named Tommy who couldn't have been more than 22, looked pale. "Something's wrong with the drill," Tommy said. "It hit resistance at 340 meters, but it's not rock. I don't know what it is." Daniel climbed onto the rig platform and checked the readouts. The drill bit had stopped advancing, but the motor was still pulling full torque. The temperature sensor attached to the bit read 127 degrees Fahrenheit, which was at least 40 degrees hotter than it should have been at that depth. "Pull it up," Daniel ordered, slowly. It took 20 minutes to retract the drill. When the bit finally emerged, everyone went silent. The tungsten carbide tips were scorched black, as if they'd been exposed to extreme heat. But more disturbing was the residue coating the bit, a thick, dark substance that looked organic, almost like tar, except it seemed to shimmer with faint iridescence in the afternoon sun. When Daniel reached out to touch it, Gordon grabbed his wrist. "Don't," Gordon said quietly. That was when Daniel noticed the other men, 3 of them, standing near the fence line watching. They wore civilian clothes, jeans, work boots, plain shirts, but they carried themselves with military precision. Daniel hadn't seen them arrive. Gordon saw Daniel looking. "New safety inspectors," he said too quickly. "From Kirtland Air Force Base. Standard procedure." It wasn't standard procedure. Daniel knew that. But he also knew when to keep his mouth shut. They shut down drilling for the day. Gordon sent the crew back to town while he and Daniel stayed behind to examine the drill bit more carefully. In the trailer with the door closed, Gordon swabbed a sample of the dark residue onto a glass slide and examined it under a portable microscope. "Jesus Christ," Gordon whispered. "What is it?" Gordon didn't answer immediately. He adjusted the microscope focus, his face tight with something Daniel couldn't quite identify. Fear, maybe, or recognition. "It's moving," Gordon finally said, "at the cellular level. This isn't geological, it's biological." Before Daniel could respond, the seismic monitors erupted with activity. The needle on the primary unit swung wildly as a low-frequency vibration rolled through the trailer. Deep, rhythmic, almost like a pulse. The lights flickered. Daniel's coffee cup rattled across the desk. Then, as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. Silence. Gordon and Daniel stared at each other. Outside they could hear the generators humming, the wind moving across the mesa. Everything sounded normal. Daniel walked to the window and looked toward the drill site. The three men from Kirtland were making phone calls, their faces grim. "Gordon," Daniel said slowly, "what are we really drilling for?" Gordon was already packing the microscope away, sealing the sample slide in a plastic evidence bag. His hands shook slightly. "Nothing good," he said. "Nothing good at all." That night Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay in his rented room at the Dulce Motor Lodge, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of the desert. Around 3 a.m. he heard helicopters. Not the small civilian kind, but heavy military transports, their rotors beating the air like war drums. The next morning, when Daniel arrived at the site, everything had changed. The drilling rig was gone. The trailers were being dismantled. A dozen new personnel had arrived overnight, all wearing black tactical uniforms with no insignia. They'd erected a large military tent over the drill shaft, and armed guards now patrolled the perimeter. Gordon met him at the gate, his face haggard, eyes bloodshot. "Project's over," Gordon said, "effective immediately. You'll be compensated for the full contract period, plus a completion bonus. Sign here." He handed Daniel a stack of documents, non-disclosure agreements, security protocols, a new contract that superseded everything he'd signed before, citing national energy security as the reason for termination. Daniel read through them carefully. The language was dense, threatening. He would never discuss the project, he would never return to the site, he would surrender all notes, photographs and samples. Violation would result in federal prosecution. "What did we find down there?" Daniel asked quietly. Gordon looked at him for a long moment. "Nothing," he said finally. "We found absolutely nothing. That's the official story, and you'd be smart to believe it." Daniel signed the papers. 2 days later, he left Dulce, driving back to Alamogordo with a check for $15,000 and a head full of questions he'd never be able to answer. Within a month, he heard that Tommy, the young driller who'd first noticed something wrong, had died in a hiking accident in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Another crew member, a geologist named Patricia Mills, was killed in a car crash on Highway 84. Daniel never spoke to Gordon Voss again, and for 46 years he tried very hard to forget that August in Dulce ever happened. Part 3. The Interference. The retired supervisor living under a new identity wasn't hard to find. Daniel had kept a list, not written down, never written down, but memorized, of everyone he'd worked with during those years. Gordon Voss had been important enough to remember. It took Daniel 3 days of searching, using genealogy databases and property records, before he found a match. Gordon Vance, age 72, living in Montrose, Colorado. The photographs on social media, a Facebook account belonging to Gordon's daughter, showed the same stocky build, the same permanent squint, just older and greyer. Daniel didn't call first. He drove the 6 hours north to Montrose, rehearsing what he'd say, and knocked on the door of a modest bungalow with a well-tended garden and a view of the San Juan Mountains. Gordon answered the door, took one look at Daniel and went pale. "Jesus Christ," Gordon whispered. "You're supposed to be forgetting." "So are you," Daniel said. "Can I come in?" They sat in Gordon's kitchen, drinking coffee that neither of them touched, while Gordon's wife, a pleasant woman named Ruth, who had no idea what her husband used to do, ran errands in town. The house was quiet, filled with the comfortable clutter of a long retirement, travel photographs, grandchildren's drawings, a half-finished puzzle on the dining room table. "Why now?" Gordon asked finally. "After all these years, why now?" Daniel slid a printed copy of the DOE report across the table. "Because they're lying. They say it was contained in 1979, but this report mentions ongoing biological containment protocols. Something's still there, Gordon. Something's still active." Gordon read the report slowly, his face unreadable. When he finished, he folded it carefully and pushed it back across the table. "You need to stop," he said. "Right now. Burn this, delete everything on your computer, and forget you ever saw it." "People died," Daniel said. "Tommy, Patricia, maybe others we don't know about. Don't I deserve to know what happened?" "No," Gordon said flatly, "you don't. Because the truth won't set you free, Daniel. It'll get you killed, just like it got them killed. So you're just going to sit here, tend your garden and pretend we didn't see what we saw?" Gordon stood up abruptly, walking to the window. He stood there for a long moment, staring out at the mountains. "They took everything," he said quietly. "Every sample, every photograph, every handwritten note. But they didn't know I'd made copies, backups. Old-school physical backups on punch cards and magnetic tape, stored in a safety deposit box under my mother's maiden name." He turned back to Daniel. "In 1983, I was diagnosed with a brain tumour, stage 3 glioblastoma. The doctors gave me 8 months. I got my affairs in order, wrote letters to my family, prepared to die. Then, 3 days before my first chemotherapy session, the tumour disappeared. Completely. The doctors called it spontaneous remission. A miracle. I called it a message." "From who?" "From whoever wanted to make sure I understood the cost of talking." Daniel felt a chill despite the warmth of the kitchen. "You think they did that to you? Gave you cancer and then took it away?" "I think," Gordon said carefully, "that what we found under Archuleta Mesa was technology we don't understand, biology we didn't create, and I think the people protecting it will do absolutely anything to keep it secret." He walked to a drawer, pulled out a plastic keycard and set it on the table. It was old, yellowed with age, with a magnetic stripe on one side, printed across the front in faded letters, MARE 12. There's an old Los Alamos data server farm outside Santa Fe. Decommissioned in 1992, but the building's still there, still powered, still mirroring archives from the 1970s and 80s. Nobody remembers it exists. This card will get you inside. "Why are you giving this to me?" Gordon sat back down, and for the first time Daniel saw real fear in his old supervisor's eyes. "Because I'm 72 years old, Daniel. I've had 50 years to make peace with my cowardice, but you still have time to be brave, or stupid. I honestly can't tell which." Daniel took the keycard. "One more thing," Gordon said as Daniel stood to leave. "When you find out what Mare 12 means, when you see what they were really doing down there, don't try to stop it. Don't try to expose it. Just document it and run. Because whatever's growing under that mesa, it's been there longer than both of us, and it'll be there long after we're gone." Part 4, the official story cracks. The Los Alamos data server facility was exactly where Gordon said it would be. A nondescript concrete building off Highway 502, hidden behind a stand of ponderosa pines, and marked only with a faded sign reading LANL Auxiliary Facility 7. The parking lot was empty, the windows dark. According to public records, the building had been sold to a private data storage company in 1998, which had gone bankrupt in 2003. Since then, it had existed in bureaucratic limbo, owned by the government but forgotten by everyone who mattered. Daniel parked his truck at 11 p.m. on a Thursday, when the highway traffic was minimal and the spring night was cold enough to see his breath. He'd brought a flashlight, a digital camera, and Gordon's keycard. His hands shook slightly as he approached the building's side entrance. The keycard worked. The lock clicked, and the door swung open on hinges that barely squeaked. Inside, emergency lighting cast everything in a dim red glow. The facility was larger than it looked from outside. A warren of corridors lined with server racks, many of them still humming with power. The air smelled like dust and ozone. Daniel found the terminal station in what must have been the main control room. 3 monitors sat on a metal desk, their screens dark. He pressed the power button on the centre monitor and waited. The system booted up, displaying a command line interface straight out of 1982. Green text on a black screen. No mouse, no icons, just a blinking cursor waiting for input. Daniel pulled out a folded piece of paper where he'd written notes from his conversation with Gordon. He typed carefully, "Access Mayor 12. The screen flickered. A password prompt appeared. Gordon had written this down too, though he'd warned Daniel it might not work after 40 years. Daniel typed "Gaslight. Archive. 1979. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the screen cleared, and folders began appearing, dozens of them, organised by date and project code. Daniel opened the folder labelled Biological Event Site D. What he found made his stomach clench. Scanned documents, laboratory reports, thermal imaging, and photographs. Dozens of high-resolution photographs taken inside the tunnel system beneath Archuleta Mesa. The first image showed a cross-section of tunnel wall, magnified to show the rock face in detail. What Daniel had initially thought was a natural geological formation wasn't natural at all. Embedded in the stone was something organic. Tissue, or what looked like tissue, forming intricate networks that resembled nerve pathways. The structures were dark, almost black, shot through with veins of metallic sheen that caught the camera flash like circuitry. Another photograph showed a larger section of tunnel. Here the growth was more extensive, covering entire wall sections in sprawling patterns that looked almost deliberate, intentional, as if the material was following some internal blueprint. Daniel scrolled through more images, his sense of unreality growing with each one. Core samples showing biological material fused directly to silicon and metal. Microscope slides revealing cellular structures that seemed to combine organic and inorganic elements. Temperature readings showing localized heat signatures that didn't correspond to any known geological process. Then he found the video file. It was short, less than 3 minutes, and the quality was poor, recorded on what must have been an early digital camera. The footage showed the interior of a tunnel, illuminated by portable work lights. A voice off camera, Daniel thought it might be Gordon's, 40 years younger, provided narration. August 24th, 1979, primary shaft, level 3. We've isolated a section approximately 12 metres into the western branch. You can see the material coating the walls. Initial analysis suggests a form of biofilm, but the structure is far more complex. Notice the metallic striations. Those aren't mineral deposits. They appear to be conducting electrical current. The camera moved closer to the wall. In the harsh light, the tissue-metal hybrid material seemed to pulse faintly, as if responding to the nearby humans. Temperature reading is 112 degrees Fahrenheit, 20 degrees above baseline. The material appears to be generating its own heat. We're also detecting low-frequency electromagnetic emissions. The pattern is unusual. The camera operator zoomed in on a particularly dense cluster of the growth. For just a moment, Daniel thought he saw something beneath the surface. Shapes that might have been cellular structures, or might have been something else, something that looked almost like letters, or numbers, or code. Then the video cut to black. An audio file began playing automatically. A man's voice, official and clipped. Containment breach forecast in 44 years. Recommend implementation of long-term monitoring protocols and preparedness for large-scale quarantine measures. Material demonstrates adaptive properties. Continued growth trajectory suggests surface exposure event by 2023. The file ended. Daniel sat back, his heart pounding. 2023, 2 years ago. He opened another folder, this one labelled Personnel Notes. Inside were psychological evaluations, medical records, security clearance reviews. He found his own file, a single page noting that Daniel Reeves had performed adequately under pressure and posed minimal security risk. But there were other files, thicker ones. Files for people Daniel didn't recognise, marked with red stamps. Compromised, discontinued, neutralised. He was about to close the folder when a new window appeared on the screen, unbidden. Text began scrolling across the display. Unauthorised access detected. Security protocol Mayor 12 activated. This terminal has been logged. Please remain where you are. Daniel didn't remain where he was. He grabbed his camera, ejected the storage device from the terminal and ran. Behind him, he heard the building's security system come alive. Locks engaging, alarms beginning to sound. He hit the exit door at full speed, crashed through into the cold night and sprinted to his truck. He was 3 miles down Highway 502 before he allowed himself to breathe. Part 5. The Descent. Daniel drove straight to Dulce, arriving just after dawn. The town looked exactly as he remembered it. Small, quiet, suspended in time. He checked into the same motor lodge where he'd stayed in 1979, requesting a room in the back where his truck wouldn't be visible from the road. He needed help. He needed someone who wouldn't dismiss what he'd found. Someone with the resources and credibility to investigate further. Someone with nothing to lose. He found that person at the Dulce family restaurant eating breakfast alone at a corner booth. Erin Blevins was 34 years old, a freelance investigative reporter who'd made a name for herself, exposing environmental violations and government corruption throughout the Southwest. Daniel had found her articles online during his drive, pieces about contaminated water supplies near Los Alamos, unexplained increases in cancer rates downwind from White Sands Missile Range, mysterious land purchases by shell corporations linked to defence contractors. She had short dark hair, sharp eyes, and the wary demeanour of someone who had been threatened enough times to take threats seriously. Daniel sat down across from her without asking. "Miss Blevins," he said quietly, "my name is Daniel Reeves, and I have evidence of an ongoing biological contamination event under Archuleta Mesa that the government has been covering up for 46 years. I'm either crazy, or you're about to break the biggest story of your career." To her credit, Erin didn't call security. She studied Daniel for a long moment, then set down her fork. "Show me," she said. They spent the next 2 hours in Daniel's motel room, reviewing everything. The DOE report, Gordon's keycard, the photographs Daniel had taken of the Los Alamos service screen. Daniel told her about 1979, about the drilling operation, about Tommy and Patricia and everyone else who died or disappeared. Erin listened without interrupting, taking notes in a worn leather journal. When Daniel finished, she sat back and exhaled slowly. "I've been tracking unexplained Department of Energy spending in this region for 3 years, she said. Budget line items that don't match any official projects. Equipment purchases that disappear into classified programs. In 2019, Homeland Security authorized construction of what they called a seismic monitoring station, built directly into Archuleta Mesa. The contract went to a private military contractor called Helix Solutions. The project budget was $47 million for a monitoring station." "That's a lot for seismographs," Daniel said. "Exactly. And here's the interesting part. Helix Solutions was founded in 2017 by former DARPA scientists specializing in biotechnology and materials science. Why would a biotech company be building earthquake monitors?" She opened her laptop and showed Daniel satellite imagery of Archuleta Mesa, dated from various years. The most recent, from 2024, showed a cluster of new buildings on the northern slope, white prefab structures arranged in a defensive perimeter, with a large ventilation array visible near the mesa's summit. "I tried to visit last year," Erin continued. "Got stopped at a checkpoint 2 miles out. Federal agents, not local police. They were polite but very clear. This was restricted land, and I needed to leave immediately. When I filed a Freedom of Information Act request, they sent me a 3-page document that was 90% redacted. Daniel leaned forward. "Can you get us in there?" "Maybe. I still have valid press credentials, and technically the access road is on Jicarilla Apache land, which means tribal law applies. I have a contact who might help." She paused. "But if we do this, you understand we're committing multiple federal crimes?" "I'm 67 years old," Daniel said. "I've spent 46 years being careful." "I'm tired of being careful." Erin smiled for the first time. "Good. Let me make some calls." The contact was a Jicarilla Apache rancher named Joseph Quintana, a man in his late 50s with weathered hands and eyes that missed nothing. He met them that evening at his ranch, 10 miles southwest of town, where the mesa rose against the darkening sky like a monument to secrets. "My grandfather worked on the original shelter project in the 1950s, Joseph said, pouring coffee in his kitchen. "He never talked about what he saw down there, but he warned us to stay away from the mesa. Said the earth underneath wasn't right, wasn't clean." "Have you noticed anything unusual?" Erin asked. "Recently, I mean." Joseph nodded. "Helicopters, 2-3 times a week, flying in after midnight, heavy transports military grade, and the cattle." He walked to the window, gesturing toward his pastures. "I've lost 23 head in the last 4 years. Found them in the morning, just lying dead in the field. No wounds, no signs of predators, but they were different. Drained. Like something had taken all the water out of them. The vet couldn't explain it. Said maybe it was a virus, but he'd never seen anything like it." "And the ground hums," Daniel said, remembering what he'd read online. "Yes. Low frequency, usually around 3 a.m. It stops during electrical blackouts, which doesn't make sense if it's geological. Something powered is making that sound. Something big." Joseph agreed to show them the access road that night. They drove in his truck, lights off, navigating by moonlight along dirt roads that wound through pinyon forest and high desert scrub. Eventually, they reached a ridge overlooking the northern approach to the mesa. Below them, Daniel could see the facility, a cluster of illuminated buildings surrounded by chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Guard towers, patrol vehicles. What Erin had called a seismic monitoring station looked more like a military forward operating base. "There's a service entrance on the east side," Joseph said, handing Erin a hand-drawn map. "Old access tunnel from the 1950s shelter project. Most people don't know it exists, but it's still passable. The gate has a keypad lock, 0726. They haven't changed it in 20 years because they think nobody knows about it." "Why are you helping us?" Daniel asked. Joseph was quiet for a moment. "Because my grandson is sick. Leukemia. He's 8 years old. 3 other children in Dulce have the same diagnosis, all in the last 2 years. The government says it's coincidence. I think it's poison. I think something is leaking out of that mesa, and they know it, and they're letting it happen anyway." He looked at Daniel directly. "So you go down there, and you find out what they're hiding, and then you tell everyone. You make sure the whole world knows." Part 6. The Erasure. They went in at 2 a.m. when the guard rotations changed and the night was darkest. Erin drove, her car a nondescript sedan that wouldn't draw attention. Daniel navigated using Joseph's map and his own memories of the terrain from 46 years ago. The service entrance was exactly where Joseph had indicated. A rusted metal door built into the mesa's rock face, camouflaged by scrub brush and decades of neglect. The keypad was ancient, its numbers worn smooth by weather and time. Daniel entered the code, 0-7-2-6. The lock clicked. Inside, the tunnel smelled like damp earth and electricity. They used headlamps to navigate, following a descending passageway that had been carved through solid rock. The walls showed tool marks from the 1950s, pickaxes and jackhammers, long before modern excavation equipment. Every 50 feet, bare bulbs hung from the ceiling, providing minimal light. After 10 minutes of walking, they reached a newer section. The rough-hewn tunnel gave way to smooth concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, and steel doors marked with modern security placards. "This is recent construction," Erin whispered. "Within the last few years." They passed through 2 more security doors, both unlocked. either through negligence or because the facility staff didn't expect anyone to use this entrance. Eventually they found what they were looking for. A freight elevator with a control panel showing buttons for levels descending far deeper than any geological survey should require. Sub-level 1, sub-level 2, sub-level 3, down to sub-level 12. Mare 12, Daniel said quietly. They descended. The elevator took nearly 3 minutes to reach the bottom, the cables creaking and groaning. When the doors finally opened, they stepped out into a world that shouldn't exist. The chamber was enormous, easily the size of an aircraft hangar carved from living rock. But the walls weren't bare stone anymore. They were covered, floor to ceiling, with the same material Daniel had seen in those 1979 photographs, organic tissue fused with metal, spreading in vast networks that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. Blues and greens and deep purples, like deep-sea creatures adapted to permanent darkness. The material was everywhere, growing across the walls, the ceiling, the floor. In some places it had formed thick cables that resembled nerve bundles or power conduits, impossible to tell which. The air was warm, humid, and smelled faintly of copper, and something else Daniel couldn't identify. Something organic. "My God," Erin breathed. They walked carefully across the chamber, following what looked like a maintenance corridor. Abandoned equipment lay scattered around, drilling rigs, excavation tools, scientific instruments, all of them partially consumed by the growth. In places, the metal had fused directly to the biological material, creating hybrid structures that seemed both technological and alive. Daniel touched one of the wall growth gently. It was warm, and it responded to his touch, brightening slightly, as if acknowledging his presence. "It's aware," he whispered. They found the maintenance bay in a side chamber, a sealed room with thick plastic sheeting hanging in strips across the entrance. A faded hazard placard hung on the door, property of United States Air Force. Project Mare 12, Biotech Containment Zone, authorized personnel only. Inside, the room had been converted into a laboratory, or perhaps a morgue. Stainless steel tables, medical equipment, containment pods lined against the far wall, each one approximately the size of a human being. Most of the pods were empty, but one, in the corner, was not. Daniel approached slowly, his heart hammering. Through the transparent upper section of the pod, he could see what was inside. It had been human once, perhaps in 1979, perhaps earlier. Now it was something else, a body that had been partially transformed, consumed, integrated into the same material that covered the walls, bones visible through translucent tissue, metallic structures growing through the skeleton like circuit boards through flesh. The face was still recognizable, preserved in a rictus of frozen agony or ecstasy. Impossible to tell which. The eyes were open, and they were watching. "Jesus Christ," Erin said. She'd raised her phone, recording video. "Daniel, this is what we found in 1979, Daniel finished. This is what they've been protecting. Not alien technology, not foreign weapons. US, our own creation. Synthetic biology that learned to think, to grow, to consume." He moved to another table where documents lay in plastic sleeves, research notes, experimental protocols. He scanned them quickly, his engineering background making sense of the technical language. Project Mare 12 had begun in 1967, according to the dates on the earliest documents. A joint venture between DARPA and the Air Force, attempting to create self-repairing materials for deep space construction. Biological compounds that could survive extreme environments, grow and adapt without human intervention, merge with existing structures to create hybrid systems stronger than anything humanity could engineer alone. The experiments had been conducted here in secret, in tunnels that already existed beneath Archuleta Mesa. And they had worked. The material had grown, adapted, evolved. It had also learned to incorporate anything it touched, including the scientists who created it. Daniel found a core sample sitting on one of the tables, sealed in a transparent containment tube. The material inside still pulsed with faint warmth, even after decades. He slipped it into his jacket pocket. "We need to go," he said. "Now." They hurried back through the chamber toward the elevator, but as they approached, the lights flickered. The bioluminescent growth on the walls brightened suddenly, illuminating the entire space in eerie blue-green light. And beneath their feet, Daniel felt it, that same rhythmic vibration he'd experienced in 1979. A pulse, like a heartbeat. The elevator doors opened before they reached them. Two men in a tactical gear stepped out, weapons holstered but visible. Behind them, a third figure, older, wearing a suit despite the underground location. He looked at Daniel and Erin with the weary expression of someone who dealt with this situation before. "Mr. Reeves," the man said calmly, "we've been expecting you since you accessed the Los Alamos archive 3 days ago." They were escorted to the surface, driven in a black SUV to a nondescript office building in Albuquerque, and placed in separate interview rooms. Daniel sat alone for 6 hours before anyone spoke to him. The man in the suit finally entered, carrying a thin folder. "My name is irrelevant," he said, sitting across from Daniel. "What matters is that you understand something crucial. You didn't find aliens, Mr. Reeves. You found us. The part of us we were never meant to create." "Then why hide it?" Daniel demanded. "If this is just a failed experiment—" "Failed?" The man laughed bitterly. "Mare 12 is the most successful experiment in human history. That material down there is smarter than we are. It's been growing, learning, evolving for 50 years. It understands physics we haven't discovered yet. It's rewriting its own genetic code. It's dreaming, Mr. Reeves, and we have no idea what it's dreaming about." He opened the folder, showing Daniel satellite thermal images of Archuleta Mesa. The entire underground system glowed with heat signatures forming patterns too complex to be random. "We can't stop it. We can only slow it down, contain it, study it. Because one day, maybe in 10 years, maybe in 50, it's going to reach the surface. And when it does, it will change everything. The question isn't whether humanity survives. It's whether we deserve to." The man stood. "You'll be released in 48 hours with no record of this conversation. Your friend Miss Blevins has already been released. Her footage was corrupted during the upload. A tragic technical failure. You're both free to live your lives. We recommend you do so quietly." Daniel was driven back to Dulce 2 days later and dropped at his truck. Erin was gone. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her social media accounts went dark. Her apartment in Santa Fe was empty, lease terminated. 1 month later, a sealed envelope arrived at Daniel's house with no return address. Inside was a single printed photograph, a frame from Erin's deleted footage. It showed the containment pod clearly, a hybrid human thing suspended inside. But this version of the image was closer, more detailed. And in the reflection of the pod's transparent surface, visible in perfect clarity, was another figure, standing behind the pod, watching the camera, watching Daniel and Erin. It was vaguely humanoid, but wrong in ways Daniel's brain struggled to process. Tall and thin, with too many joints. Its surface seemed to shift between organic tissue and metallic structure, never settling on either. And its eyes, if they were eyes, glowed with the same bioluminescent blue-green as the walls. Written on the back of the photograph in neat handwriting, "It sees you now. It remembers." Part 7. The Silent Renewal. 6 months passed. The Department of Energy issued a press release announcing the controlled demolition and environmental remediation of unstable underground structures beneath Archuleta Mesa. The operation was completed in October 2025, they said. The area was now safe, sealed, contained. Daniel watched the news from his home in Alamogordo. He saw the footage of trucks hauling away debris, officials in hard hats giving interviews about geological stability and public safety. Everything looked professional, convincing, final. But he knew better. The satellite imagery told a different story. New construction had begun on the mesa within weeks of the supposed demolition. Not demolition equipment, but infrastructure. Massive ventilation arrays, power substations capable of supporting a small city, concrete reinforcement structures that looked less like containment and more like preparation. And the hum had returned. Joseph Quintana called Daniel in December. His voice was tight with barely controlled fear. "It's louder than before," Joseph said. "The hum. It used to stop around dawn. Now it goes all day. My grandson." His voice broke. "His cancer's in remission. The doctors say it's impossible, that leukemia doesn't just disappear like this. The 3 other sick children in Dulce are also in remission. All of them at the same time." "That's good news," Daniel said carefully. "Is it?" Joseph asked. "Or is something down there changing them? Rewriting them? My grandson says he dreams about blue light and being connected to something vast. He's 8 years old, Daniel. What kind of dreams are those?" Daniel didn't have an answer. He sat in his workshop that night, unable to sleep, listening to his old seismometer, the same equipment he'd used in 1979, never quite able to throw it away. He'd set it up weeks ago, pointing the sensors north toward Dulce, 120 miles away. The signal was there, faint but unmistakable. A rhythmic pulse, deep and slow. 1 beat every 1.3 seconds, the exact rhythm of a resting human heartbeat. Daniel opened his laptop and pulled up the core sample data he'd photographed at Los Alamos. The growth projections, the containment breach forecast. The calculations had predicted surface exposure by 2023. It was now 2025. Whatever was under Archuleta Mesa had already reached the surface. It was already spreading, and the government wasn't fighting it anymore. They were managing it, controlling the narrative, preparing the world for something they could no longer prevent. Daniel thought about the photograph, the creature standing in the reflection, watching. He thought about Gordon's miracle recovery from cancer. He thought about Joseph's grandson and the other children, suddenly healed by something that grew in darkness beneath the earth. Mare 12 wasn't killing people anymore. It was helping them, changing them, preparing them. For what, Daniel didn't know. Perhaps no one did. Perhaps even the thing itself didn't fully understand what it was becoming. He saved his files to 3 separate encrypted drives and mailed them to addresses around the country. Insurance, in case someone decided he'd become too dangerous to ignore. Then he poured himself a glass of whiskey and walked outside. The desert night was cold and clear, stars sharp as broken glass. To the north, toward Dulce, Daniel thought he could see a faint glow on the horizon. It might have been light pollution from Albuquerque. It might have been something else. The seismometer in his workshop continued its steady rhythm. 1 beat, then another, like a heart, like a promise, like a countdown. Daniel raised his glass to the distant mesa and whispered, "God help us all." The stars didn't answer. But somewhere beneath the earth, in chambers carved from living rock, something that had once been an experiment and was now something far more continued its patient, inexorable work, growing, learning, dreaming, and waiting. What if the greatest mystery in human history wasn't lost, but buried on purpose? Before we dive into the depths, I want to give a thank you to Ilwyn, eventually, and so many others who suggested this story idea. Your creativity and enthusiasm make these videos possible. If you have ideas for future stories, please leave them in the comments below. I read every single one. Now let's descend into a mystery that spans millennia, where ancient secrets and modern conspiracies collide beneath 3 miles of dark Atlantic water. Act 1. The Discovery. The submersible's floodlights cut through the darkness like surgical blades, illuminating particles of marine snow that drifted past the reinforced viewing port. Maya Wren pressed her face closer to the glass. her breath fogging the surface as she watched the magnetometer reading spike again. "That's the fourth anomaly in 20 minutes, she murmured, her fingers flying across the laptop keyboard mounted to her workstation. The cramped interior of the research vessel, Meridian hummed with the steady thrum of engines and the occasional ping of the sonar array. "Could be ferrous deposits," offered James Park, her graduate assistant, his Korean accent still thick despite 5 years at Woods Hole. He adjusted his glasses and leaned over her shoulder to study the screen. "The Mid-Atlantic Ridge is volcanically active. Plenty of iron-rich basalt down there." Maya shook her head, her dark curls escaping from the loose bun she'd tied that morning. At 36, she'd been mapping oceanic magnetic fields for over a decade, and she knew the difference between geological noise and genuine anomaly. This was different. This was organised. "Basalt doesn't form perfect right angles, James." She pulled up the 3-dimensional rendering of the seafloor they'd been building for the past 6 weeks. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration had funded this expedition to study geomagnetic fluctuations along the Azores sector of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Routine science, or so they'd thought. But 3 days ago, their multi-beam sonar had detected something that made Maya's academic instincts scream. Beneath 400 metres of volcanic sediment, approximately 800 nautical miles west of the Portuguese coast, something massive was hiding. The rendering rotated on her screen. A rectilinear structure nearly 2 kilometres across, composed of what appeared to be 3 concentric rings connected by radial pathways. The magnetic signature was unlike anything in the geological record, consistent with worked stone or metal, not natural formation. "What's the depth?" asked Captain Torres from the bridge above, his voice crackling through the intercom. 2,800 metres, Maya replied, "right at the edge of the abyssal plain." "And you're certain this isn't a shipwreck? Maybe a World War II convoy?" Maya zoomed in on one section of the structure. "Captain, this thing predates steel shipping by a considerable margin. Look at the sediment stratification. We're looking at burial that occurred at least 12,000 years ago, possibly more. Whatever this is, it's been down there since the last ice age." Silence filled the intercom. Even Torres, who'd spent 40 years at sea and thought he'd seen everything, had no response to that. James broke the quiet. "Should we notify NOAA?" "Already done," Maya said, typing the final commands to upload their findings to the shared US-European Union oceanographic database. "Full data set, images, coordinates, everything's going to the archive server now." She hit enter and leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a moment of satisfaction. This was why she'd become an oceanographer. Not for the grants or the conferences, but for moments like this, when the ocean revealed secrets it had kept for millennia. The upload completed. Maya watched the confirmation dialogue appear on her screen. Data successfully transmitted to NOAA archive server. Reference code AZ-MAR-2025-0847. "Coffee?" James offered, holding up the thermal carafe. God, yes. He poured her a cup of the thick black liquid that barely qualified as coffee, but had become essential fuel during their long shifts. Maya wrapped her hands around the warm mug and returned her attention to the sonar display, watching the seafloor scroll past as Meridian continued its survey pattern. Then her screen went black. "What the—" Maya tapped several keys. Nothing. She checked the power supply. Green light. The computer was running, but her access had been cut. "James, are you seeing this?" He checked his own terminal. "I've got nothing. The whole network just locked me out." Maya tried her administrative password. Access denied. She tried her backup credentials. Access denied. She attempted to reconnect to the NOAA server. "Your credentials have been revoked. Contact system administrator." "That's impossible," she breathed. "I uploaded the data 15 minutes ago. You can't revoke research credentials without a formal review, and that takes weeks." Captain Torres's voice came through the intercom, tight with tension. "Ren, I'm getting a priority communication from NOAA headquarters. They're ordering us to cease all surveying operations in this sector immediately and return to port." "What? Why?" "They didn't say." but the order came with a national security classification tag. Maya's hands went cold despite the warm coffee mug. National security for geological research? Captain, request clarification. We're in international waters conducting civilian scientific research funded by US taxpayer money. They can't just... The order is non-negotiable, Wren. We turn around now, or we lose our research license. I'm sorry. The intercom clicked off. Maya stared at her blank screen, her mind racing. She'd uploaded complete data to the server. Coordinates, sonar imagery, magnetic readings, everything. And within minutes, her access had been revoked, and their expedition terminated. Someone didn't want them looking at what was down there. James set down his coffee cup carefully. What do we do? Maya opened her laptop, her personal device not connected to the ship's network. Before uploading to NOAA, she'd made a habit of backing up all her research to an encrypted cloud drive. A habit born from a graduate school disaster when a server crash had destroyed 6 months of thesis work. She accessed the drive. The files were still there. All of them. We find out what we discovered, she said quietly, and we find out why someone wants it buried. Act 2. The Black Archive. The coffee shop in Woods Hole, Massachusetts was nearly empty at 3 p.m. Maya sat in a corner booth, her laptop open but her attention focused on the door. She'd been waiting for 20 minutes, and with each passing moment she wondered if this was a mistake. The email had arrived 2 days after Meridian returned to port. No subject line, sent from an anonymous encrypted address. I worked on something called Project Delphi in the 1970s. I know what you found. We need to talk. Come alone. Below that was a time, a location, and a warning. Delete this message after reading. Maya had almost ignored it. She was a scientist, not a conspiracy theorist. But her credentials were still revoked. NOAA had offered no explanation beyond administrative review. Her calls to supervisors went unreturned. And when she'd tried to discuss her findings with colleagues, she'd been met with uncomfortable silence and sudden excuses to end conversations. Someone was actively suppressing her research. The door chimed. An elderly man entered, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose body no longer obeyed as quickly as his mind commanded. He was perhaps 75, with close-cropped white hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent years at sea. His eyes swept the coffee shop with the methodical assessment of a man trained to notice threats. Those eyes found Maya. He nodded slightly and approached her booth. "You're Wren," he said. It wasn't a question. "And you are?" "Thomas Calloway, Commander US Navy, retired." He slid into the booth across from her, moving with surprising grace despite his age. "I spent 30 years in naval intelligence and submarine operations. The last 5 of those were dedicated to Project Delphi." Maya studied him. He wore a simple windbreaker and khakis, nothing to indicate his military background. But something in his posture, the way he held himself, suggested he was telling the truth. "What was Project Delphi?" she asked. Calloway glanced around the coffee shop. Satisfied they weren't being observed, he pulled a weathered manila folder from inside his jacket and placed it on the table. Officially, deep ocean surveillance, tracking Soviet submarine movements during the Cold War. We deployed a network of hydrophones across the Atlantic, listening for propeller signatures and reactor signatures. And unofficially, his expression darkened. We were looking for architectural anomalies, structures on the seafloor that couldn't be explained by natural geology. Maya felt her pulse quicken. Why? Because we'd found them before. Calloway opened the folder. Inside were yellowed photographs and documents marked with classification stamps, most of them reading Top Secret or Classified, Mare 12. In 1968, a Navy bathyscaphe conducting deep ocean surveys off the coast of Morocco detected what the crew described as Cyclopean masonry at a depth of 4,000 metres, massive blocks of worked stone arranged in geometric patterns. He slid one photograph across the table. It was grainy and water-damaged, but Maya could make out angular shapes in the murky underwater gloom, too regular to be natural, too massive to be modern construction. The Navy classified the findings immediately, Calloway continued, but certain people in the intelligence community became very interested. If there were prehistoric structures on the ocean floor, what else might be down there? What technology? What knowledge? So they created Project Delphi to search for more, Maya said. Exactly. We spent 5 years mapping the Atlantic seafloor with sonar arrays far more sophisticated than anything available to civilian researchers. We found dozens of anomalies. Most turned out to be shipwrecks or geological formations that looked artificial but weren't. But some... He trailed off, his gaze distant. Some were real, Maya finished. Calloway nodded slowly. In 1977, we detected a massive structure near the mid-Atlantic ridge. The sonar returns were unlike anything we'd seen before. Concentric rings, radial pathways, electromagnetic signatures that shouldn't exist underwater. It matched descriptions from Plato's account of Atlantis with disturbing precision. Maya's academic skepticism warred with the evidence before her. She'd spent her career dealing with facts, with measurable data. Ancient Atlantis was myth, not science. But the sonar data on her laptop told a different story. What happened? She asked. Calloway's hands trembled slightly as he pulled out another document. We sent a deep-sea expedition to investigate. The submarine Triton II descended to the coordinates on July 12, 1977. 6 crew members, including our best deep-sea specialist and a geologist from MIT. And they went silent 18 hours into the dive. No distress call, no emergency beacon, just silence. We sent recovery vessels, but they found nothing. No wreckage, no debris. The Triton II simply vanished. Maya studied the document he'd placed before her. It was a mission report, heavily redacted, but certain phrases were still visible. Unprecedented electromagnetic interference. Structural composition inconsistent with known materials. Recommend immediate termination of Project Delphi. The project was shut down within a month, Calloway said. All data was classified under a new designation, Mare 12. That's the highest level of classification in naval intelligence. Higher than nuclear submarine specifications, higher than strategic weapons data. Everything related to Delphi was buried, and everyone involved was reassigned with non-disclosure agreements that would land us in military prison if we talked. So why are you talking now? He met her eyes, and she saw something there that made her chest tighten. Fear, but also resignation. Because I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. I've got maybe 3 months left, and because I've watched the monitoring data for 50 years, waiting to see if anyone would rediscover what we found. There's been monitoring? Maya asked sharply. Ongoing surveillance of these sites? Of course. The project ended, but the interest didn't. Various agencies have maintained deep ocean sensors throughout the Atlantic. When your data upload hit the NOAA servers, it triggered automated alerts in at least 3 different intelligence databases. That explained the immediate lockdown. Her discovery hadn't just been noticed, it had been anticipated. Commander Calloway, what exactly do you think is down there? He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, seagulls cried as they wheeled above the harbour. The coffee shop's espresso machine hissed and steamed. I don't think anything, he said finally. I know, I've seen the classified analyses, the materials tests, the archaeological assessments that were conducted before everything was locked down. What's beneath that sediment isn't just ruins, Maya. It's a containment facility. Containing what? That's the question that got 6 people killed in 1977. He reached into his jacket again and pulled out a small USB drive. These are the original Delphi coordinates for the primary site. They're approximately 40 nautical miles from where you conducted your survey. You found one of the outer structures. The main complex is deeper, more heavily buried. Maya took the drive, her fingers closing around the small piece of plastic and metal that seemed to weigh far more than it should. What am I supposed to do with this? That's up to you. But understand that the moment you access those coordinates, you'll be placing yourself in considerable danger. The people who manage Mare 12 have unlimited resources and absolutely no oversight. They've maintained this secret for half a century. They won't let a civilian oceanographer expose it now. He stood slowly, buttoning his windbreaker. Commander, wait. I've told you everything I can. The rest is on that drive. delete our correspondence, destroy any evidence that we met. And Maya... He paused at the edge of the booth. If you do decide to pursue this, don't use official channels, don't trust anyone in government or academia, and for God's sake, don't tell anyone where you're going. He walked toward the door, his gait stiff but purposeful. Commander Calloway, Maya called after him. He turned. Why give this to me? Why not take it to the press or leak it online? A sad smile crossed his weathered face. Because you're a scientist. You'll need proof before you believe it. And if you find that proof, you'll know how to interpret it in ways I never could. Just be careful. Some discoveries aren't meant to be made. Then he was gone, disappearing into the grey afternoon. Maya sat alone in the booth, the USB drive burning in her palm. Every rational instinct told her to destroy it, to forget this conversation, to file a grievance with NOAA and wait for the bureaucratic wheels to turn. But she'd seen the sonar data. She'd watched her credentials evaporate within minutes of uploading her research. She'd felt the wrongness of it all, the sense that something far larger than scientific protocol was at play. She inserted the USB drive into her laptop. The files were encrypted, but Calloway had included the password in the file name. Triton 77. Maya typed it in and held her breath. The drive contained dozens of files, sonar maps, bathymetric surveys, electromagnetic spectrum analyses, and dozens of photographs. She opened the images folder. The first photo made her breath catch. It showed a sonar composite of the seafloor, but the resolution was far beyond anything available to her expedition. And there, rendered in stunning detail, were the 3 concentric rings she'd detected. But now she could see they were part of a much larger complex. Radial pathways connected the rings like spokes on a wheel. Massive structures rose from the seafloor, their geometry too precise to be natural. And at the centre of it all was something that made her academic skepticism crumble entirely. A pyramid. Not stepped like Mayan construction or smooth like Egyptian. This was something else entirely. Obsidian black, perfectly symmetrical, rising nearly 300 metres from the ocean floor. The image was stamped with a date, June 1977, 1 month before the Triton II disappeared. Maya's hand shook as she opened the next file. It was a geological analysis, written in dense technical language, but certain passages had been highlighted. Composition inconsistent with terrestrial igneous formations. Isotopic analysis suggests artificial vitrification process. Presence of manufactured nanostructures within crystalline matrix. Electromagnetic properties indicate active power source, despite 12,000-year burial. Active power source. Something down there was still functioning after 12 millennia underwater. The next file was a memo from the project director to the Secretary of the Navy. Project Delphi has identified a structure of potentially non-terrestrial origin. Recommend immediate containment protocols and suspension of all deep ocean research in affected sectors. Further investigation poses unacceptable risk to national security and possibly global stability. Non-terrestrial origin. Maya closed the laptop, her mind reeling. This couldn't be real. This was the territory of late-night radio shows and conspiracy theory websites, not legitimate science. But the data was real. The sonar returns were real. And Commander Calloway's fear had been very, very real. Her phone buzzed, a text message from an unknown number. Commander Thomas Calloway was found dead this morning. Boating accident off Cape Cod. My condolences. Stop asking questions. Maya stared at the message, her hands trembling. Calloway had met with her 3 hours ago. He'd been fine, dying of cancer, yes, but very much alive. A boating accident, within hours of giving her classified information. She deleted the message and pulled the USB drive from her laptop. Then she made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find out what was buried beneath the Atlantic, and she was going to find out why people were willing to kill to keep it secret. Act 3. The Descent. Finding a submersible proved easier than Maya expected. The hard part was finding one whose owner wouldn't ask too many questions. She found both in Leo Castellano, a 42-year-old marine engineer who'd spent 15 years designing deep-sea equipment for oil companies before an ethical dispute led him to quit and start his own oceanographic equipment rental business. He operated out of a converted warehouse in Ponta Delgada in the Azores, and his website advertised no corporate bureaucracy, no red tape, just good equipment and reasonable rates. Maya had flown to the Azores using her savings and rented a small boat under a false name. When she approached Leo with her proposal, a privately funded deep-sea dive to investigate geological formations, he'd been sceptical until she showed him the sonar data. "This is real?" he'd asked, studying the images on her laptop. "As real as anything I've ever measured." He'd studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes assessing. "You're that oceanographer, aren't you? The one whose research credentials got pulled. I saw the talk on the forums." Maya's stomach sank. "I can explain." "No need. I left petroleum engineering because they kept ordering me to bury inconvenient data about environmental damage. I recognise a cover-up when I see one." He'd grinned. "When do we leave?" Now, 3 days later, Maya stood on the deck of Leo's research vessel Prometheus, watching as his crew prepared the submersible Orpheus for deployment. The submarine was a marvel of engineering, a titanium sphere capable of reaching depths of 6,000 metres, equipped with high-definition cameras, manipulator arms, and enough life support for 72 hours. "Final systems check complete," Leo announced, emerging from the sub's access hatch. "All green across the board. Weather window looks good for the next 8 hours." Maya nodded, trying to calm the nervous energy thrumming through her veins. She'd done dozens of submersible dives in her career, but never one like this. Never one that might reveal evidence of a pre-Ice Age civilization. Or worse, evidence that someone had been killing to keep that civilization hidden. "You're sure about this?" Leo asked quietly. "Once we're down there, we're committed. No abort unless it's a life-threatening emergency." "I'm sure." They climbed into the submersible together, squeezing through the narrow hatch into the cramped interior. The sphere was barely 2 meters across, packed with instruments, life support systems, and supplies. Maya settled into one of the 2 seats and began checking the camera systems while Leo ran through the pre-dive checklist. "Surface crew, this is Orpheus," Leo spoke into the comm system. "Ready for deployment." "Copy, Orpheus. You're cleared for dive. Good luck down there." The crane activated with a mechanical whine. The submersible lifted off the deck, swung out over the ocean, and began its descent toward the dark Atlantic waters. The moment they hit the surface, the world transformed. Sunlight filtered through the water in shifting columns of blue-green light. Fish scattered from the descending submersible. Maya watched the depth gauge climb 10 meters, 20, 50. "Setting ballast for descent," Leo announced. "Target depth 2,900 meters. Estimated descent time 90 minutes. The submersible's motors engaged with a low hum, and they began to sink faster. The sunlight faded gradually, shifting from brilliant blue to deep azure to purple-black. At 200 meters they entered the twilight zone, where only the faintest traces of surface light penetrated. At 500 meters the darkness became total. Leo activated the exterior floods, and suddenly they were in a bubble of light surrounded by infinite black. Particles of organic matter drifted past like snow, marine snow, the constant rain of dead plankton and fish scales and fecal pellets that fed the deep ocean's ecosystem. "Depth 1,000 meters, Leo reported. "All systems nominal. How are you doing?" "Good," Maya lied. The darkness pressed against the viewing port like a physical thing. She forced herself to focus on the instruments, on the sonar display that showed the seafloor still far below. They descended in silence, the only sounds the hum of the motors and the occasional ping of the active sonar. The pressure gauge climbed steadily. Outside, the water pressure was now over 100 atmospheres, enough to crush an unprotected human instantly. "Depth 2,000 meters, Leo said, entering the abyssal zone." The temperature inside the sphere had dropped noticeably despite the heaters. Maya's breath formed small clouds of vapour. She checked the magnetometer, already detecting the anomalies that had first drawn her attention. "I'm getting readings," she said. "Electromagnetic signature increasing. Bearing 235 degrees. Leo adjusted their course slightly. The sonar showed the seafloor rising to meet them as they followed the slope of the mid-Atlantic ridge. Depth 2,500 meters. Bottom coming up fast. Maya activated the HD cameras, their feeds appearing on the monitors mounted throughout the sphere. The lights illuminated swirling clouds of sediment kicked up by their descent. 2,800 meters, levelling off. The submersible's descent slowed, and they hovered 10 meters above the seafloor. Leo activated the lateral thrusters, and they began moving forward at a crawl, following the coordinates from Callaway's USB drive. The seafloor was a landscape of volcanic rock and sediment, dotted with the occasional deep-sea creature, rat-tailed fish with bioluminescent lures, spider crabs picking through the mud, ghostly white anemones waving in the current. Then the lights caught something that didn't belong. "Stop!" Maya breathed. Leo killed the thrusters immediately. They drifted forward on momentum, the lights sweeping across what Maya had spotted. It was a wall, not a rock formation, not a coral reef. A wall, black as obsidian, rising from the sediment in a perfectly straight line that extended beyond the reach of their lights in both directions. "Mother of God," Leo whispered. Maya guided one of the external cameras closer. The wall surface was smooth, almost glassy, with a texture that suggested it had been melted rather than carved. And there, barely visible beneath a thin layer of biological film, were markings. "Are those inscriptions?" Leo asked. Maya leaned closer to the monitor. The markings were geometric, circles, spirals, and linear patterns that seemed to repeat at regular intervals, and among them, symbols that made her academic certainty crumble entirely. A double helix, the universal symbol for DNA, rendered in stone 12,000 years before Watson and Crick. "This shouldn't be possible," she said, "but it is." Leo was already manoeuvring the sub along the wall's length. "We're seeing it right now." They followed the wall for nearly a kilometre, the massive structure curving gradually. Maya realised they were travelling along the outer ring of the concentric circles she detected with sonar. The wall rose at least 30 metres from the seafloor, disappearing into the sediment above. There, Leo pointed, an opening. A gap in the wall, too regular to be damage, clearly intentional, an entrance. "Should we go through?" he asked. Maya checked the electromagnetic readings. They were spiking dramatically, the frequency patterns unlike anything in her database of geological phenomena. "Yes," she said, "but carefully." Leo guided Orpheus through the opening. On the other side, the seafloor dropped away into a vast circular basin, and at its centre. Maya's breath caught in her throat. The pyramid, just like in Callaway's photographs, but seeing it in person was entirely different. It rose from the basin floor in perfect geometric precision, each face meeting at precise angles, the entire structure glowing with a faint blue-green bioluminescence that had nothing to do with marine life. "That's not biological," Leo said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's electromagnetic radiation. The structure itself is generating light." "After 12,000 years underwater," Maya added. "Whatever technology built this, it's still active." They descended into the basin, circling the pyramid slowly. It was massive. The base alone had to be nearly half a kilometre across. The surface was the same obsidian-like material as the walls, but smoother, more refined. And across every face were inscriptions, thousands of them, covering the entire structure in a dense lattice of symbols and diagrams. Maya photographed everything, her cameras clicking constantly. The symbols included mathematical equations, astronomical charts showing planetary orbits, and again, repeatedly, that double helix pattern intertwined with stellar coordinates. "It's a map," she realised, "or a message. These aren't just decorations, they're communicating something." "What's that?" Leo pointed to the pyramid's apex. Something protruded from the structure's peak, a crystalline formation that pulsed with the same blue-green light, but brighter, more concentrated. "Can we get closer?" Maya asked. Leo engaged the thrusters, and they rose toward the apex. As they approached, Maya's instruments went haywire. The electromagnetic readings spiked off the scale. Static filled the comm system. Even the submersible's lights flickered. "We're getting interference," Leo reported, his voice tense. "The pyramid's output is playing hell with our electronics." "Just a little closer." They ascended until they were level with the crystal formation. It was beautiful, a perfectly symmetrical structure of what looked like quartz or diamond, easily 3 meters tall, pulsing with internal light like a heartbeat. And through that light, Maya could see something inside. "Leo, can you position one of the cameras for a better angle?" He manoeuvred the external camera arm, bringing it within a meter of the crystal. Maya zoomed in, enhancing the image, filtering out the glare. Inside the crystal was a chamber, and inside that chamber, suspended in some kind of translucent medium, were objects, not artifacts, not tools, organisms. They looked almost like jellyfish, but the symmetry was too perfect, the structure too organized. Tendrils extended from a central nucleus in precise geometric patterns. The nucleus itself glowed with the same blue-green light, and within it, Maya could see structures that resembled cells, but cells far more complex than anything in Earth's evolutionary history. "Those are alive," she whispered. "That's impossible," Leo said. "Nothing could survive that long in—" The organisms moved, not drifting with current. There was no current inside the crystal. This was purposeful movement, coordinated. The tendrils extended and contracted in synchronous patterns, like neurons firing in a brain. "They're not preserved," Maya said, her voice shaking. "They're active, functioning. These things have been alive for 12,000 years. "That violates every principle of biology," Leo said. "Nothing lives that long, nothing. Unless they weren't entirely biological," Maya thought. The DNA helix symbols, the cellular complexity, the electromagnetic signatures. What if these organisms were biotechnological? Part biology, part machine. One of the organisms pressed against the inside of the crystal, its tendrils spreading across the surface. Maya could swear it was looking at them, examining them the way they were examining it. "We need to document this," she said, her scientific instincts overriding her growing unease. "Full spectrum analysis, tissue samples, if we can manage—" The pyramid's light pulsed brighter. The electromagnetic readings doubled, tripled. "Maya, we need to back off," Leo warned. "The systems are overloading." "Just another minute." A sound filled the submersible, not through the comm system, but through the hull itself. A deep, resonant tone that vibrated through Maya's bones. It reminded her of whale song, but lower, more complex, and beneath it, patterns, rhythms, almost like language. "What is that?" Leo asked. Maya checked her acoustic sensors. The sound wasn't random noise, it was structured, repeating in complex sequences. Someone, something, was transmitting. And then, on the sonar display, Maya saw something that made her blood turn to ice. The sediment around the pyramid was moving, shifting, rising in coordinated patterns that couldn't be natural. "The pyramid's waking up," she breathed. "What?" "The electromagnetic pulses. They're activating something buried in the sediment. Look at the sonar. There are more structures down there, all connected to the pyramid, and they're all starting to generate the same frequencies." The acoustic signal intensified. The water around them began to glow with bioluminescent plankton, responding to the pyramid's electromagnetic output. The entire basin was coming alive. "We're leaving," Leo said firmly. "Now." He engaged the ballast system, and Orpheus began to rise. Maya kept her cameras trained on the pyramid, recording everything, even as the structure receded below them. The organisms inside the crystal pressed against its surface, their tendrils spreading wider, moving faster, almost desperately. Then Maya saw something that would haunt her nightmares for months to come. A crack appeared in the crystal, just a hairline fracture, barely visible, but it was there. And as they watched, it spread, slowly, inevitably. "The containment is failing," Maya said. "Whatever that pyramid was built to hold, it's breaking free." They cleared the basin's edge and shot toward the surface, the submersible's motors straining. Behind them, the acoustic signal continued, growing louder, more complex, more urgent. Maya looked back one last time. Through the darkness she could see the pyramid's glow intensifying, pulsing in rhythmic patterns that spread across the entire structure like veins of light. The organisms weren't just moving now, they were growing, extending tendrils beyond the crystal's boundaries into the surrounding water, and on the sonar Maya saw the other structures buried in the sediment beginning to break through, rising, activating. Whatever Atlantis had been built to contain, whatever ancient civilization had buried it beneath volcanic sediment and 3 miles of ocean, was waking up after 12,000 years, and humanity had no idea what was coming. Act 4. The Suppression. They surfaced 6 hours later, exhausted and terrified. The moment Orpheus broke the surface, Leo activated the emergency beacon, a decision they both regretted within the hour. The NATO frigate appeared on the horizon before they had even finished transferring their data to the surface vessel. Maya watched through binoculars as the warship approached with deliberate speed, its profile unmistakable even at distance. "That's a patrol vessel," Leo said, his voice tight. "Armed. What the hell is NATO doing out here?" "Looking for us," Maya replied quietly. The frigate pulled alongside Prometheus, dwarfing Leo's smaller research vessel. Armed sailors lined the rails. A voice boomed over a loudspeaker in English, Portuguese and French. "This is NATO research vessel integrity. You're operating in a restricted maritime zone. Stand by for boarding." "Restricted?" Leo looked at Maya. "We check the maritime charts." "This is open ocean, international waters." "It wasn't restricted 6 hours ago," Maya said. "It is now." The boarding party came aboard with professional efficiency. A dozen sailors and 3 men in civilian clothing who moved with the precise coordination of military special forces. One of them, a tall man in his 50s with greying temples and cold blue eyes, approached Maya directly. "I'm Commander Peterson, NATO Maritime Research Division," he said, showing credentials that Maya didn't recognise. "You've been conducting unauthorised research in protected waters." "This is international ocean," Leo protested. "You can't just..." "Under Article 87 of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, we have authority to restrict access to areas of environmental sensitivity," Peterson interrupted smoothly. "A massive gas seep has been detected in this sector. Highly toxic, potentially explosive. We're evacuating all vessels for their safety." "That's convenient," Maya said. "How long has this gas seep been active?" Peterson's expression didn't change. "Long enough. Now we'll need to confiscate all recording equipment and data storage devices. Standard contamination protocol." "Contamination?" Leo said incredulously. "From what?" "Sulfur compounds can corrupt electronic media," Peterson said smoothly. "We're doing you a favour." Within minutes, armed sailors were removing every hard drive, camera and recording device from both vessels. Maya watched helplessly as they carried away terabytes of data. The pyramid, the organisms, the inscriptions, everything. "This is illegal seizure," she protested. Peterson stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. "You dove to coordinates from a classified military project. You documented structures covered by international security protocols that predate your birth. You have no legal standing here, and if you push this, you'll discover exactly how far outside the law you really are." He stepped back, his professional smile returning. "For your safety, you'll be escorted to port immediately. Any attempt to return to this sector will result in arrest. Are we clear?" Maya said nothing. Peterson took her silence as agreement and returned to the frigate. By sunset, they were back in Ponta Delgada, their equipment gone, their data seized. Leo was furious. Maya was terrified, because she knew they'd seen something they weren't supposed to see, and people who saw such things had a tendency to disappear. Act 5. The Ancient Connection. 3 days later, Maya's university position was terminated. The official reason: fabrication of research data and violation of ethical research protocols. Her protest fell on deaf ears. Every colleague she trusted suddenly refused to return her calls. She was being erased. That night, as she packed her office, an email arrived from an anonymous account. The subject line read, "You opened a vault that was meant to stay closed. Study the Svalbard files." Svalbard, the Norwegian archipelago known primarily for its global seed vault, a massive underground facility designed to preserve crop diversity in case of global catastrophe. Maya spent the next week researching, following digital breadcrumbs through leaked documents, conspiracy forums, and archived UN reports. What she found was disturbing. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault had an annex, an older section, built in the 1980s, that predated the official vault by decades. According to leaked architectural plans, this section wasn't designed for seeds. It was designed for biological samples. Maya used the last of her savings to fly to Longyearbyen, Svalbard's main settlement. The midnight sun hung above the horizon, casting everything in perpetual twilight. She hired a local guide named Eric, telling him she was a journalist researching climate data. He took her to the vault's location, a massive entrance built into the mountainside, its triangular concrete portal iconic and foreboding. "The seed vault is closed to visitors," Eric said, "but there are maintenance tunnels. Used to be coal mines before they built the vault. Can you show me?" Eric studied her for a long moment. "You're not a journalist." "No. This is dangerous, whatever you're doing." "I know." He nodded slowly. "There's a tunnel entrance 3 kilometres north. Connects to the old sections. I can get you inside, but after that you're on your own." The tunnel was cramped and dark, carved through permafrost that gleamed in Maya's headlamp. They walked for nearly an hour before Eric stopped at a sealed metal door. "This is as far as I go," he said, producing a key ring. "This door hasn't been opened in 15 years, according to the maintenance logs. Whatever you find in there, you didn't get it from me." Maya thanked him and waited until his footsteps faded before opening the door. Beyond was a concrete corridor lit by emergency lighting. The air was cold enough that her breath crystallized immediately. She walked carefully, her footsteps echoing. The corridor opened into a vault, not the modern seed storage, but something older, industrial. The walls were lined with sealed containers, each marked with hazard symbols and classification codes. And there, on several containers, was the symbol she'd seen on the pyramid. The double helix intertwined with stellar coordinates. Maya's hands shook as she approached one of the containers. It was sealed with multiple locks, but years of permafrost had made the metal brittle. She used a crowbar from the maintenance area and pried it open. Inside were dozens of smaller containment vessels, each filled with luminescent fluid. And floating in that fluid were samples, tissue samples, cellular cultures, all glowing with the same blue-green light she'd seen in the pyramid. A dossier lay in the container, sealed in waterproof plastic. Maya pulled it out and opened it. The title page read, "Delphi Continuation Project, Genomic Preservation Protocol." She read through the document with growing horror. The organisms from the pyramid weren't alien. They were human-made, or rather made by whatever civilization had existed before the last ice age. A civilization that had mastered biotechnology to the point of creating self-replicating, self-sustaining biological machines. The dossier explained that when Project Delphi discovered the pyramid in 1977, they'd recovered samples. Analysis revealed that the organisms contained human DNA fragments, but modified, enhanced, merged with technology at the molecular level. The ancient civilization hadn't been destroyed, they'd transcended, merging with their own creations. And when they realized what they'd become, biological entities that could theoretically live forever, replicate endlessly, remake the world in their image, they'd made a terrible choice. They'd buried themselves, imprisoned their own evolution beneath the ocean floor, hoping that future civilizations would be wiser. that humanity wouldn't make the same mistakes. The final page of the dossier was a mission report dated September 1977, 1 month after the Triton II disappeared. Containment breach imminent. The organisms are demonstrating adaptive capabilities beyond initial assessments. Recommend tectonic burial via directed seismic detonation. Maintain monitoring protocols. Under no circumstances should the primary containment structure be disturbed. Someone had written in the margin, in faded ink, they didn't die. They're waiting. Maya photographed every page with her phone, her hands trembling. This was the proof. This was what they'd been hiding. Atlantis wasn't a myth. It was a warning. Act 6. The Truth Beneath. Maya leaked everything online. The photos from Svalbard, the sonar data she'd backed up to her cloud drive, even the coordinates from Commander Calloway's USB drive. She posted it all to encrypted forums, sent it to investigative journalists, uploaded it to document sharing sites. The response was exactly what she expected. Mainstream media ignored it. Academics dismissed it as elaborate fraud, and within hours most of the uploads were removed for violating community guidelines. But some sites kept it up. Some people believed. And in the comments and private messages, Maya found others. Whistleblowers from various agencies, former military personnel, scientists who'd encountered similar suppressions. A picture began to emerge. The world's governments hadn't just continued Project Delphi, they'd expanded it. Hidden under climate monitoring programs, deep ocean research initiatives and environmental surveys, a global network had been watching the Atlantic for 50 years. Watching and waiting for the containment to fail, because it was failing. Maya's dive had accelerated the process, but geological surveys showed it had been deteriorating for decades. The pyramid's electromagnetic output had been increasing annually. Seismic activity around the site was intensifying. The vault was waking up just as the ancient builders had feared. 2 weeks after her leak, Maya received a message from an encrypted account. It contained a single file, real-time seismic data from the mid-Atlantic ridge. The readings showed a pattern, regular pulses repeating every 47 minutes, emanating from the exact coordinates of the pyramid, and the pattern matched perfectly with the double helix inscription she'd photographed. The organisms weren't just alive, they were transmitting, broadcasting their genetic code into the surrounding ocean, into the global current systems, potentially into the atmosphere itself. The ancient civilization's final gift, or curse, was spreading. Maya sat in her tiny apartment, watching the seismic data scroll across her laptop screen. She'd lost everything pursuing this truth. Her career, her reputation, her safety. Commander Calloway was dead. Others who'd helped her had disappeared or recanted their statements under mysterious pressure. But the data didn't lie, and the world needed to know. She typed out one final post attaching all the evidence. My name is Maya Wren. I'm an oceanographer who discovered something beneath the Atlantic Ocean that challenges everything we think we know about human history. What I found suggests that Atlantis was real, but not the way we imagined. It wasn't a paradise lost to natural disaster. It was a containment facility, built by an ancient civilization to imprison something they'd created and couldn't control. That containment is failing, and the governments of the world have known about this for 50 years, keeping it secret while they study it, trying to harness it, risking all of humanity in the process. I don't know what happens next, but I know we deserve the truth. We deserve to know what's waking up 3 miles beneath the ocean, because if we don't understand it, we can't prepare for it. The vault is opening, and we're running out of time. She hit send and sat back exhausted. Outside her window, the night sky was clear, stars scattered across the darkness like the inscriptions on the pyramid. Somewhere beneath the Atlantic, ancient biotechnology was pulsing with stolen heartbeats, waiting. Maya put on her headphones and accessed the live feed from a research buoy she'd secretly maintained contact with, one of hundreds monitoring the Atlantic. She listened to the low-frequency hum transmitted through 3 miles of water, converted to audible sound by the buoy's hydrophones. And there, beneath the random noise of ocean currents and marine life, she heard it. A pattern, rhythmic, purposeful, almost musical. The double helix rendered in sound, repeating endlessly, spreading through the global ocean like a whispered secret. The organisms were singing, calling, broadcasting their existence to whatever might be listening. Maya closed her eyes and listened as the ocean itself seemed to whisper through her headphones, the ancient voice of a civilization that had tried to bury its greatest achievement and most terrible mistake. "The vault is waking," she whispered to the empty room, and somewhere beneath the Atlantic, in the crushing darkness 3 miles down, the pyramid pulsed with blue-green light, its crystal apex slowly fracturing, its imprisoned secrets spreading into the water molecule by molecule, cell by cell. Humanity had 12,000 years to prepare for this moment. It wouldn't be enough. The end. Thank you for reading The Tides of Silence. If you enjoyed this story, please share it with others who appreciate science fiction that blends real oceanography with ancient mysteries. And remember, sometimes the most terrifying discoveries are the ones we make about ourselves. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and never stop looking into the deep. Urson's expression didn't change. Long enough. Now we'll need to confiscate all recording equipment and data storage devices. Standard contamination protocol. Contamination? Leo said incredulously. From what? Sulfur compounds can corrupt electronic media, Peterson said smoothly. We're doing you a favour. Within minutes, armed sailors were removing every hard drive, camera and recording device from both vessels. Maya watched helplessly as they carried away terabytes of data. The pyramid, the organisms, the inscriptions, everything. "This is illegal seizure," she protested. Peterson stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. "You dove to coordinates from a classified military project. You documented structures covered by international security protocols that predate your birth. You have no legal standing here, and if you push this, you'll discover exactly how far outside the law you really are." He stepped back, his professional smile returning. "For your safety, you'll be escorted to port immediately. Any attempt to return to this sector will result in arrest. Are we clear?" Maya said nothing. Peterson took her silence as agreement and returned to the frigate. By sunset, they were back in Ponta Delgada, their equipment gone, their data seized. Leo was furious. Maya was terrified, because she knew they'd seen something they weren't supposed to see, and people who saw such things had a tendency to disappear. The next morning, Maya's university credentials were completely revoked. An email from the Dean of Oceanographic Studies informed her that her position was under review for ethical violations and potential research fraud. Her access to university systems was suspended. Her laboratory was locked. She tried calling colleagues, but most didn't answer. Those who did were polite but distant, as if speaking to her might somehow contaminate them too. By the third day, the message was clear. She was being systematically erased from academic life. That evening, as Maya sat in her hotel room trying to figure out her next move, an email arrived from an anonymous encrypted account. No subject line, just a single sentence. You opened a vault that was meant to stay closed. Study the Svalbard files. Maya stared at the message. Svalbard. The Norwegian archipelago in the Arctic Ocean, famous primarily for one thing, the global seed vault. She spent the next 12 hours researching. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault was a massive underground facility carved into a mountain, designed to preserve crop diversity in case of global catastrophe. It held over 1 million seed samples from around the world, humanity's agricultural insurance policy. But as Maya dug deeper through leaked documents, conspiracy forums and archived United Nations reports, she found references to something else. An older facility. An annex built in the 1980s, before the official seed vault existed, and this older section wasn't designed for seeds. According to fragmentary architectural plans she found on an obscure document-sharing site, the original Svalbard facility had been built to store biological samples, not plants, something else entirely. Several of the leaked documents bore a familiar classification, MARE12. Maya made her decision. She used the last of her savings to book a flight to Oslo, then north to Longyearbyen, Svalbard's main settlement. Act 5. The Ancient Connection. The Arctic sun never fully set in summer, casting everything in perpetual twilight. Maya stepped off the small aircraft onto the tarmac at Svalbard Airport, the cold wind cutting through her jacket despite it being June. Longyearbyen was a small town of brightly coloured buildings against a backdrop of snow-covered mountains and glaciers. It felt like the edge of the world, isolated, remote, forgotten by civilization. Perfect for hiding secrets. Maya checked into a small guest house and spent the evening in the common area, nursing coffee and listening to conversations. Most visitors were scientists, climate researchers, or adventure tourists come to see polar bears and glaciers. She struck up a conversation with a weathered man in his 50s who introduced himself as Eric Johansson, a local guide and former coal miner. "The seed vault," he said when she mentioned her interest. "It's closed to visitors, very secure, but there are maintenance tunnels, old coal mine passages that connect to some of the facility's outer sections." "Could someone access those tunnels?" Maya asked carefully. Eric studied her over his coffee cup. "You're not a tourist." "No." "And you're not here for the seeds." "No." He was quiet for a moment, then leaned forward. "My father worked construction when they built the original facility in 1984, before the seed vault. He told me stories about strange equipment they installed. Biological containment systems, cryogenic storage, things that had nothing to do with preserving crops. He signed confidentiality agreements, but before he died, he told me the truth. There's more in that mountain than seeds." Maya felt her pulse quicken. "Can you help me get inside?" Eric considered this. "What you're planning is illegal, trespassing at minimum, possibly violating international security protocols." "I know, and you're going to do it anyway." "I have to." "People are dying to keep these secrets buried. I need to know why." Eric nodded slowly. "There's a tunnel entrance about 3 kilometres north of town, officially abandoned, but the locks were replaced 5 years ago with very expensive security systems. Someone doesn't want people exploring those old passages." "Can you get me past the security?" He smiled grimly. "I maintained those systems when they were installed. I kept copies of the access codes." 2 hours later, Maya followed Eric through the darkness of an abandoned coal mine. Their headlamps cut narrow beams through the blackness, illuminating walls of ice-veined rock. The temperature was well below freezing, and Maya's breath crystallized in clouds before her face. They walked for nearly an hour, descending deeper into the mountain. Finally, Eric stopped at a heavy steel door set into the rock wall. A modern Tektronic keypad was mounted beside it, incongruous against the ancient stone. "This is as far as I go," Eric said. He entered a 12-digit code and the lock clicked open. "Beyond this door, you're in the facility." There are no cameras in the old sections. They were decommissioned when the new seed vault opened. But if someone is actively monitoring, they'll know the door was opened. "How long do I have?" 30 minutes before someone could realistically get here from town. Maybe an hour if weather delays them. Don't push your luck. Maya thanked him and waited until his footsteps faded back up the tunnel before pulling the door open. Beyond was a concrete corridor lit by dim emergency lighting. The air was intensely cold, far colder than the mine tunnel. She walked carefully, her footsteps echoing off the walls. The corridor opened into a large vault chamber. The walls were lined with sealed storage containers, each marked with hazard symbols and classification codes that Maya didn't recognise. The containers were old, decades old, their surfaces covered in frost. and there, on several containers near the back of the chamber, was a symbol that made Maya's heart stop. The double helix intertwined with stellar coordinates, the same symbol from the pyramid. Her hands shook as she approached the containers. They were sealed with multiple locks, but years of permafrost expansion had made the metal brittle. She found a pry bar in a maintenance locker and used it to force open the nearest container. Inside were dozens of smaller vessels, each filled with luminescent fluid. Floating in that fluid were tissue samples, organic material that glowed with the same blue-green bioluminescence she'd seen in the pyramid's crystal chamber. A dossier lay at the bottom of the container, sealed in waterproof plastic. Maya pulled it out with trembling fingers and opened it. The title page read, Project Delphi Continuation, Genomic Preservation Protocol. She began reading, and with each page her understanding of everything shifted. The organisms weren't alien. They weren't even entirely foreign to Earth's evolutionary history. According to the analysis, they contained human DNA fragments, but modified, enhanced, merged with synthetic biological structures at the molecular level. The dossier explained that when Project Delphi discovered the pyramid in 1977, they'd managed to recover samples before the Triton II was lost. Analysis revealed something extraordinary. The organisms represented a form of biotechnology that merged organic and synthetic materials so completely that the distinction became meaningless. They were self-replicating, self-sustaining, capable of adapting to any environment, and they contained genetic information from dozens of species, not just human, but animals, plants, even microorganisms, all woven together in an impossibly complex genomic tapestry. The scientists who studied them concluded that the pyramid wasn't built by an alien civilization. It was built by humans, or rather, by whatever humans had become in a civilization that existed before the last ice age. A civilization advanced enough to master biotechnology at a level that made modern genetic engineering look primitive. But something had gone wrong. Maya found a section marked Containment Rationale. The text was clinical, but the implications were terrifying. Analysis suggests the organisms were designed as a form of biological transcendence, an attempt to merge human consciousness with self-perpetuating biomechanical systems. Initial subjects successfully integrated with the technology, achieving extended lifespans and enhanced capabilities. However, the organisms demonstrated unexpected evolutionary behaviours. They began replicating beyond design parameters. They started rewriting their own genetic code, incorporating DNA from any biological matter they encountered. Within 3 generations, they had diverged so far from their original human template that the designation post-human became inadequate. They were becoming something else entirely. The original civilization made a choice. Rather than allow this runaway evolution to consume the biosphere, they constructed containment facilities. The largest of these, designated Site Alpha in our records, is the structure we discovered in the Atlantic. It was designed not as a city, but as a prison. The ancient builders buried themselves there along with their creations, hoping that future civilizations would be wiser, that humanity would learn from their mistakes. Maya turned to the final page. It was a mission report dated September 17th, 1977. The Triton II expedition has been lost. All crew presumed dead. Final transmissions indicated catastrophic containment breach at Site Alpha. The organisms demonstrated rapid adaptation to deep ocean environment and aggressive behaviour toward human subjects. Emergency protocols activated. Recommendation: tectonic burial via directed seismic detonation. A series of precisely calibrated explosives will trigger undersea landslides, burying Site Alpha under an additional 500 metres of sediment. This should reinforce containment for at least another century. All recovered samples transferred to Svalbard Biological Archive for preservation and study under MARE-12 protocols. Maintain continuous monitoring of Site Alpha. Under no circumstances should the primary containment structure be disturbed. Someone had written in the margin in faded blue ink, "They didn't die, they're waiting." Another note dated 2003, "Seismic activity increasing. Containment degradation accelerating faster than models predicted." And a final note from 2019, "Electromagnetic output from Site Alpha up 47% since 2010. Recommend evacuation protocols for coastal populations within 1,000 kilometres if breach occurs." Maya photographed every page with her phone, her mind reeling. They'd known. For nearly 50 years, governments around the world had known that the containment was failing. They'd been studying the organisms, preserving samples, preparing for what might happen, but they'd told no one. She closed the dossier and looked at the glowing samples in their containers. Beautiful. Terrifying. The product of a civilization that had tried to transcend its biological limitations and instead created something that threatened all life on Earth. A distant sound echoed through the corridor, voices, footsteps. Security was coming faster than Eric had predicted. Maya sealed the container and ran back toward the tunnel entrance. Behind her, she heard shouts, the sound of people entering the vault chamber. She made it to the steel door and slipped through, pulling it closed behind her. Then she ran through the darkness of the coal mine, her headlamp bouncing wildly, Eric's voice calling from ahead, "This way! Hurry!" They emerged into the Arctic twilight 20 minutes later, both breathing hard. Eric led her to a small boat moored at the harbour. "You need to leave Svalbard," he said. "Now. Whatever you found, they'll be looking for you." "I know. Did you get what you needed?" Maya touched her phone in her pocket, feeling the weight of the photographs. "Yes." "Then go. And whatever you do with that information, be careful. Some secrets are buried for good reasons." Act 6. The Truth Beneath. Maya returned to the United States via a circuitous route, Oslo to London to Montreal to Boston, changing her appearance at each stop, paying cash whenever possible. She knew she was likely being tracked, but she hoped the indirect path would buy her time. She needed that time to get the information out. From a cheap hotel in Portland, Maine, Maya uploaded everything. The photographs from Svalbard, the sonar data from the pyramid that she'd backed up to encrypted cloud storage, the coordinates from Commander Calloway's USB drive, Commander Calloway's death notice, documentation of her credential revocation, everything. She posted it to encrypted forums, sent it to investigative journalists at major news outlets, uploaded it to document-sharing sites and whistleblower platforms. She created detailed write-ups explaining what she'd found, connecting the dots between Project Delphi, the pyramid, the organisms, and the global cover-up. Then she waited. The response was exactly what she expected, and somehow worse. Mainstream media ignored her completely. Not a single major outlet picked up the story. Academic journals dismissed it as elaborate fraud. The uploaded documents disappeared from most platforms within hours, removed for violating community guidelines or spreading misinformation. A few conspiracy theory websites ran with it, but their coverage was so sensationalized that it actually hurt her credibility. They mixed her genuine evidence with wild speculation about ancient aliens and government mind control, making the entire story seem ridiculous. But some people believed. In encrypted chat rooms and private forums, Maya found others. Former military personnel who'd worked on ocean surveillance projects, scientists who'd encountered similar suppressions, government contractors who'd seen things they couldn't explain. A picture emerged from these conversations. The world's governments hadn't just continued Project Delphi after 1977, they'd expanded it massively. Hidden under the cover of climate monitoring programs, deep ocean research initiatives and environmental surveys, a vast international network had been watching the Atlantic for 5 decades. Watching and waiting for the containment to fail, because it was failing. The seismic detonations in 1977 had bought time, but not enough. Geological surveys showed the pyramid's electromagnetic output had been increasing steadily since the 1990s. The growth was exponential, doubling every few years. Someone sent Maya a link to real-time seismic monitoring data from the mid-Atlantic ridge. She accessed it through multiple proxy servers, watching the readouts with growing horror. Regular pulses emanated from the exact coordinates of the pyramid. Not random seismic noise, but organised patterns, rhythmic, repeating every 47 minutes, and the pattern matched the double helix inscription she'd photographed. The organisms weren't just alive, they were transmitting, broadcasting their genetic code through vibrations in the Earth's crust, through electromagnetic pulses in the water, potentially into the atmosphere itself through mechanisms Maya didn't fully understand. The ancient civilization's final legacy was spreading, molecule by molecule, cell by cell, into the modern world. Maya spent 3 weeks evading what she was certain was surveillance, moving between cheap hotels, using burner phones, meeting with the few people who believed her in anonymous locations. She documented everything, creating a complete record of her investigation. And then she made a decision. She would stop hiding. She would put her name and face on the record, forcing them to either acknowledge the truth or silence her publicly, something they seemed reluctant to do. From a small apartment she'd rented under a friend's name in Providence, Rhode Island, Maya recorded a video. She explained everything. Her discovery, the NATO interception, Svalbard, the dossier, the organisms, the failing containment. She uploaded it to every platform she could find. Most copies were removed within hours, but some stayed up, and people shared them faster than they could be deleted. The video went viral in certain communities. Not mainstream, major platforms suppressed it too effectively for that, but it spread through alternative media, scientific forums, and among people who'd learned to distrust official narratives. Maya became simultaneously famous and invisible. Famous in certain circles, but completely ignored by mainstream media and academia. It was a strange kind of notoriety. 3 days after her video went public, Maya received a message on her encrypted phone. No words, just a file attachment. It was live data from a deep ocean sensor array, real-time monitoring from the pyramid site. The electromagnetic readings had spiked dramatically. The rhythmic pulses were now occurring every 12 minutes instead of every 47. The intensity had increased by over 300%. Something was happening at the pyramid. Something was accelerating. Maya accessed every monitoring source she could find. Seismic sensors, oceanographic buoys, even amateur radio operators who reported strange low-frequency signals. All of them told the same story. The containment was failing, not gradually but catastrophically. And then the messages started appearing in her encrypted channels. From other scientists, from government whistleblowers, from people inside the monitoring programs. We're detecting organic material in water samples from the Atlantic. DNA fragments matching the Svalbard samples. Coastal sensors are registering bioluminescent blooms along the mid-Atlantic ridge. The patterns are spreading. Emergency meetings at NATO headquarters. Something about evacuation protocols. They're mobilising naval assets to the site. Submarine teams, containment vessels. It's happening. Maya sat in her small apartment surrounded by printouts and laptop screens, watching as humanity's hidden history began to break through the surface. She thought about Commander Calloway, who died to get her this information, about the Triton II crew, lost in 1977, about the ancient civilization that had tried to transcend its limitations and instead created something that might destroy its descendants 12,000 years later. She opened her laptop and began writing one final post. My name is Maya Wren. I'm an oceanographer who discovered something beneath the Atlantic Ocean that challenges everything we think we know about human history. Atlantis was real. But it wasn't the paradise described in myths. It was a containment facility, a prison built by an ancient civilization to lock away something they'd created and couldn't control. They buried themselves there along with their creation, hoping we would be wiser, that we would learn from their mistakes. But we didn't learn. We found their prison. We studied it in secret. And now the containment is failing. The world's governments have known about this for 50 years. They've kept it classified, kept it hidden, studying the technology while ignoring the danger. And now we're out of time. I don't know what happens next. Maybe the organisms will remain dormant. Maybe the containment will hold for another 1,000 years. Or maybe we're about to face the consequences of our ancestors' hubris and our own. But I know we deserve the truth. We deserve to know what's waking up beneath the ocean. Because if we don't understand it, we can't prepare for it. And if we can't prepare for it, we won't survive it. I'm uploading all my evidence, coordinates, photographs, documents, everything. Share it, study it. Demand answers from your governments. Don't let them keep hiding this. The vault is opening, and we need to be ready. Maya hit send and sat back, exhausted. Outside her window, Providence was waking up. People heading to work, living their ordinary lives, unaware that beneath 3 miles of Atlantic water, ancient biotechnology was pulsing with stolen heartbeats, spreading through the ocean, perhaps already integrating into the planetary ecosystem. She put on her headphones and accessed the live audio feed from a research buoy she'd secretly maintained contact with. The buoy's hydrophones converted underwater sounds to audible frequencies, and there it was, a low-frequency hum, transmitted through thousands of miles of water, not random noise, but organised, rhythmic, almost musical. The double helix rendered in sound, repeating endlessly, spreading through the global ocean like a whispered secret that had waited 12 millennia to be heard. Maya closed her eyes and listened as the ocean sang, the ancient voice of a civilization that had tried to bury its greatest achievement and most terrible mistake. The organisms were calling, broadcasting their existence to whatever might be listening. To each other, perhaps. Or to something else. Something the ancient builders had feared so much they'd chosen burial over escape. On her laptop screen, seismic sensors recorded new tremors at the pyramid coordinates. Not random earthquakes, but patterns. Organised patterns that repeated the double helix formation in 3 dimensions. The vault wasn't just opening, it was waking up, becoming active in ways that suggested intelligence, purpose, awareness. Maya thought about the inscription she'd seen on the pyramid's wall, the stellar coordinates, the genetic information, the merger of biology and technology. The ancient civilization hadn't just created organisms, they'd created a message, a warning encoded in DNA and stone and electromagnetic fields. And now that message was being broadcast to the world. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Coast Guard reporting massive bioluminescent bloom 200 miles off the Azores, spreading at approximately 15 knots, composition unknown. Recommend avoiding the area. Another message. Fishing vessels reporting equipment failures in the North Atlantic. All electronic systems, no explanation. Another. Strange readings in Gulf Stream waters. DNA analysis shows sequences that don't match any known organism. It was happening. Slowly, inexorably. The organisms were spreading beyond the containment, adapting to the modern ocean, beginning whatever process the ancient builders had feared. Maya stood and walked to her window, looking out at the ordinary world, people going about their lives, cars on the street, birds in the trees, life continuing as it always had, unaware that everything might be about to change. She didn't know if humanity could survive what was coming. The ancient civilization had been far more advanced, and they'd failed to control their creation. But they'd also left behind a warning, a record, a chance for their descendants to make better choices. Maya returned to her laptop and began writing again. Not another warning, but something else. A detailed analysis of the organism's structure based on the Svalbard files. A guide to understanding the ancient biotechnology. Information that might help humanity survive, if anyone was willing to listen. She worked through the night, documenting everything she knew, everything she'd learned, creating a resource for scientists and researchers who might come after her, for people who would need to understand what they were facing. As dawn broke over Providence, Maya uploaded her work to every platform she could access. Then she encrypted her hard drives, backed everything up to multiple secure locations, and prepared to disappear. They would come for her eventually. But the information was out there now. The truth was spreading faster than they could suppress it. She thought about Commander Calloway's final words. Some discoveries aren't meant to be made. Maybe he was right, but the discovery had been made, the vault was open, and now humanity would have to face the consequences of curiosity that transcended the boundaries of time and wisdom. Maya gathered her belongings and left the apartment. She didn't know where she would go or how long she could stay ahead of those who wanted her silenced. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The world had changed. Whether anyone acknowledged it or not, whether it made the news or remained hidden in classified files, the fundamental reality of human existence had shifted. We were no longer alone with our own creations. We shared the world now with the creations of our ancestors, creations that had waited 12,000 years for a chance to fulfill their original purpose. And that purpose, written in DNA and stone and electromagnetic pulses, was still unfolding beneath the dark waters of the Atlantic. Epilogue. 6 months later, marine biologists began reporting unusual phenomena in the Atlantic Ocean. Bioluminescent organisms with no clear place in existing taxonomy. Electromagnetic anomalies that disrupted shipping navigation. Strange patterns in water chemistry that couldn't be explained by known processes. Official explanations blamed climate change, industrial pollution, natural variations in ocean currents. But in encrypted forums and private conversations, scientists shared a different story. They showed DNA analyses of the new organisms, sequences that contained fragments of human genetic code mixed with structures that seemed designed rather than evolved. Some claimed the organisms were spreading, adapting, integrating with existing marine ecosystems in ways that suggested intelligence. Others dismissed it all as conspiracy theory and coincidence. Maya Wren disappeared from public view. Some said she'd gone into hiding. Others claimed she'd been silenced by government agents. A few conspiracy theorists insisted she'd never existed at all, that the entire story was disinformation designed to distract from real issues. But in the deep places of the internet, her research continued to circulate. Her photographs of the pyramid, her analysis of the ancient biotechnology, her warnings about what might be coming. And in the Atlantic Ocean, 3 miles down in crushing darkness and cold, the pyramid continued to pulse with blue-green light. The crystal at its apex, now fully fractured, released its contents into the surrounding water. The organisms spread through the deep currents, carrying with them the genetic legacy of a civilization that had tried to transcend its biological limits. They were patient. They had waited 12,000 years. They could wait a little longer. The ancient builders had left a warning encoded in stone and DNA. We became gods and created monsters. We buried ourselves to save you. Do not repeat our mistakes. But humanity, like every civilization before it, believed it could control what it created. The vault was open now. The warning had been given, and the future, whatever it held, would be shaped by choices made in the depths of the ocean and in the hearts of those who refused to learn from the past. The organisms sang through the dark water, their electromagnetic voices carrying information that might be a gift or a curse, a promise or a threat. And on the surface, the world continued to turn, unaware that everything had already changed. The tide was rising, and this time there would be no burial deep enough to contain what had been released.